Hey everybody, Dan from Sci-Fi Models and Stuff, and today we're going to be showing you a quick tip, and we're going to be learning how to decant paint from a spray can. Now when you're working with resin kits, especially one like this that includes some brass and mixed media, it's very, very important to prime, and more specifically, it's important to prime with a lacquer-based primer. Acrylic primers like Stynylrez, MIG, One Shot, or even the Badger acrylic primer claim to be good primers. But really, in my experience, I've found that's not the case. I found that using a water-based or acrylic primer just doesn't quite cut it. While it may cover up some defects and maybe fill in some gaps, it doesn't adhere to the surface like a primer is really supposed to do. Now, a really good primer to use is Mr. Surfacer 1500. This is preferred by model builders all over the country and is a really, really great primer. It fills in gaps, has good adhesion, and acts as a good unifying layer for your paint. But they only make gray and black. Now when I'm doing something like a rust chipping layer or something like that, I like to use a primer in brown or red oxide. Now within the last few years, Tamiya came out with a red version of their fine surface primer, which is really a wonderful primer. And for 99% of the things I prime, it works well. Like I said, they have that very fine nozzle, and Tamiya primer shrinks quite a bit, so you don't often spray too much or get runs or anything like that. However, there are some downsides to this. This is expensive. The normal price on a can like this is something like $11. You can get them on sale or you can get them online for cheaper, but that's not always an option. On the other hand, Duplicolor primer like this does the same. It fills scratches, it sands down, and it promotes good adhesion. You can find this at a hardware store or an automotive parts store for $6. Another thing to note is this is a 6-ounce can, and this is a 12-ounce can. And look at that, their colors are really very similar. So that leads us to our solution, and that is decanting from the spray can. Now decanting at its heart is a very simple process. Basically what you're doing is you're getting the paint out of the can into a jar. Container like this maybe, that you can save for later, pour it into your airbrush and use it like any other paint. However, that can be difficult because the propellant used in the spray can can cause issues for your airbrush. Unfortunately, you can't often just spray into your airbrush. There's really only a few things you need. A can, of course. You need a jar to hold the paint in. I like to use a small jar just because it fits on my paint shelf like the rest of my bottles. You need a drinking straw, and you need some poster putty. And that's it. You can cut down your drinking straw to a short length. That doesn't really matter. It's just for convenience sake. And before you do anything else, you want to tape off the top of your jar. I use Tamiya tape for this, but it doesn't matter. And what you want to do is cover almost the whole jar, but leave a slit for that straw to fit through. This is because this process can be very messy, and I'll explain later how the paint can actually explode out of your jar. So if that happens, you want to make sure that the lid of the jar is covered as much as possible so you don't make a mess. You might also want to try doing this outside your first couple times, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. So I've taped off my jar, leaving only a little slit there. That should be fine. Next step is you take your straw and you get an idea of how it'll fit on the nozzle. Then you take some blue tack or poster putty. You could even use silly putty for this. And you basically seal that straw around the nozzle. Sometimes it's easier to tape that on there first and then put the putty on. And just like that, I have that puttied on. It stays by itself. Shake the can just like you were going to use it. I should also mention that it helps to warm up the can, help things flow a little more smoothly. And you simply put your straw in there. As you can probably see, we're getting some paint, but we're not getting as much as you would think, only a few drops per press. That's because a lot of this paint is infused with the propellant gas. Now if you've used a spray paint before, you notice that after you spray it, it gets very cold. The propellant is also much colder than the air. And that's kind of an issue. because that propellant is still infused with the paint. And if you heat this too quickly, the paint will actually boil over. That can make a huge mess if you're not careful. So one thing you need to do before you use the paint is to let it degas. And there's a few ways you can do that. Generally, the warmth just from your fingertips will be enough to heat it up to let that gas boil out naturally. But you may want to let it sit at room temperature for a little bit too. Another thing you want to make sure to do is to not fill your jar too much, because this will boil over and it will make a mess. So we're going to do a little bit more. I like to do it just a little bit at a time. So our jar is about half full. We're going to let it sit for a little bit longer and then add a little more. Okay, one last thing. Once you're satisfied with the amount that's in there, do not cap it off. The pressure will build up and it may cause an issue. What you want to do is actually just leave that tape still on there. A little bit of a vent hole on top. And let it sit. I normally let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. Some people advocate letting it sit overnight, but I've never had any issues once that first round of gas boils off. And there you have it. That's how you decant paint from a spray can and use it right in your airbrush. All right, everybody, thanks for watching.